Thank you for tuning in to this author interview that's part of our ongoing Read Woke video series. Read Woke is a national movement started by school librarian Cicely Lewis, and one of the movement's central goals is to encourage readers to learn about the culture and experiences of others, as well as to empower people from traditionally disenfranchised groups by highlighting books that feature their unique stories and experiences. So I'm Tara. I'm a programming librarian with the Cedar Rapids Public Library, and today I have with me a special guest, Satish Jayaraj. Satish is a fantasy author, poet, and writer who got his Bachelor's of Arts from Purdue University and his MFA from Hamline University. He's originally from India, and he spent most of his early years in Oman and the U.A.E. And since coming to America, he has lived in Indiana, Minnesota, and now good old Cedar Rapids, Iowa. The Secret of the Zipacana Dragons is his first novel, and Satish also works at the Lad Library as a patron service specialist. So welcome.
Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, of course. So you enjoy writing poetry, and in 2018 you published your first book, The Secret of the Zipacana Dragons. Would you be willing to share a little bit about your relationship with writing and what led you to want to become an author?
Yeah. So it was in high school, actually, where I was into all things geek. I was playing Warcraft video games, and I started drawing fantasy weapons. Again, very geek-oriented. And at some point, I drew one weapon that I just wanted to write a story to. And so I wrote the story to it, which was 22 pages. And I had an idea of where the story was going to go, but then I let my characters take over, and it went in a completely different direction. And that surprised the journey, and in some sense, even finding out that my character had a much nobler goal than I did for the story. It changed me a little bit. And so right from that point, I was very interested in writing and the journey of writing and then what we can kind of get from stories and how powerful stories are, not just for the writers, but then of course for readers as well.
That's kind of cool, the idea of like the characters taking life and kind of taking over the story from you.
Mm-hmm.
I kind of like
that. To me, those are the best like stories where you kind of give it over to them, and that emotional journey. I think it was Flannery O'Connor who had that quote that says stories give you feelings that you don't have to pay for. And so that journey that you go on with the story through all those, the tragedy, sometimes the laughter even, but all of that, mainly when you think about like tragedy and things, but so you kind of go through that journey with them to have those feelings. But of course, fortunately, you're not going through that yourself. And so that's kind of how it built empathy.
Cool. So how far along in that writing process was it before you felt like the characters were taking over? Like, I'm just kind of interested, like, was it quite a bit like into your writing process or?
So that happened like in high school itself. Like that story was 22 pages. And so that happened in that story itself.
Okay.
So right then was when I kind of felt that.
Cool.
And was fascinated by it. And then I wrote several different things. I just continued to write after that.
Nice.
Yeah.
Would you mind giving us like a quick intro of the book for people who haven't read it and might be interested?
Yeah, absolutely. So this is the book.
Yay!
Called The Secret of the Zipacana Dragons. So it's about a young elf boy who's orphaned, who believes that it is his destiny to grow up and fight dragons. The dragons who killed his father. So he's extremely enraged, and he goes on this task on his own. He's quite violent, and he's noticed by people who decide, yeah, we're going to recruit him for essentially his dream job. And so he gets into it, he gets excited. At some point, he starts to kind of realize that he might not be fighting on the right side, but he's still young. He's always had this idea that this is what he wants to do. So he's conflicted between what he should do and what he wants to do. And he kind of gets wrapped up as well in this world of politics. There are four different races of this world of his that he's in, the world of Adajari, and they all want to destroy the dragons, but they all kind of want the credit for it. They all don't really like each other, and so there's a lot of political games kind of going on, and he's kind of wrapped up in all of that as well.
Cool. Yeah, I did appreciate the character development. I think those are like the best stories, or like that's a component of a good story, is when the character starts out one way and has like some sort of development like over the course of the story. So
Yeah.
um so your book contains four main races of characters. You have the
Mm-hmm.
elves, the Amesha, the devs, and the Keylok. I really appreciated the detail and creativity that went into fleshing out these characters, and it was cool to see their relationships with each other. But how did you come up with the new ideas? So the Mesha and the Keylok.
So that took years. And so really what was fun about writing this novel, and this novel is that same story that I wrote in high school, just redone. Um, and I'd become fascinated with mythology, just all sorts of mythology, and looking into seeing like the commonality between those mythologies, and realizing that a lot of what we traditionally think of as fantasy is mainly European Western mythology. It comes from a lot of like the Tolkien-esque stuff, which is very British, and then has like a lot of Nordic influences. And so my interest was always in what can we do? What can I do to bring in these other stories that haven't really been involved as much? So I really wanted to focus on Indian mythology, Middle Eastern mythology, and then indigenous mythologies as well. And the commonalities between them was again really fascinating to me. So my four races, we have the elves, which mainly follow kind of that same, a little bit of that Nordic influence. But then the other ones, the devs are mainly Indian. The Amesha were somewhat Middle Eastern, and then the Kilak were indigenous, and then even like Mayan and Aztec.
Cool.
That slowly started to kind of change with their magical attributes. Like the Kilak, for example, have connections with animals. And what's fascinating to me is how, the crow, for example, has the same motif in Irish mythology as it does in Indian mythology. So
Oh,
they
cool.
became kind of symbolic of, let me use this to again explore these monomyth ideas, these ideas of how these animals are represented in different mythologies, what their symbolism is, but then of course also without sacrificing the fact that, well, we need to tell a good story.
Very cool. Um, yeah, I just thought that was neat to, like, it was just neat to have some different kinds of characters introduced. And I just thought that was cool to hear your creativity process behind it. So I wanted to talk a little bit about your literary group, Cracked Walnut. So
Mm-hmm.
you started that in the Twin Cities, and then you've hosted some events here in Cedar Rapids. And I attended one this year that focused on the theme of the absence of love. And it was just really neat to hear, like, the stories were very personal and emotional. And I don't think I've really experienced something like that very often, or if at all. And so I just wanted to have you maybe talk a little bit more about that, like your inspiration for that and why you think
Sure.
it's important.
And I'll say that absence of love reading that we did, that may have been one of the most powerful that we've ever done. And I
Yeah,
think it was
definitely
just
made
the
me
stuff.
cry a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, I think it was the subject matter of, it's not an attractive one, but the absence of love, and then a lot of, so the people, I generally get like 5 to 6 different people, and I try really to strive for a little bit of fiction, a little bit of poetry, and then music as well. And what came out in this one was just a lot of instances of abuse, physical and even emotional abuse. And I mean, so that particular one it was one of those that, when I did it, I'm like, this probably isn't going to attract a large audience just because of the name of it. but I knew that,
Yay,
right?
absence of love, come join
Yeah, it's
us.
not a celebratory thing that you attend, right? Um, but when it was one of like it's one of the top five that we've ever done, just
Hmm.
because it was so powerful. It was therapeutic for the people who performed, but then also who read it. Like we definitely moved people with that one. Yeah, so I started in the Twin Cities. It was, I graduated from Hamline University, and at the time I just was kind of writing was actually I was struggling to do creative writing at the time, just focus on my own writing with just personal struggles going on related to just immigration issues and things, and so I had to just
Hmm.
kind of put my energy into something else. And so I started the Crack Walnut reading series, where the idea was I'd get six writers together and we'd all just do a public performance, and it would be a traveling literary reading series where we'd go to different places. The idea being knowing that poetry is not something that gets a lot of people excited. Like no one's going to, well, few people I will say are gonna like drive across the Twin Cities to see a poetry
Hmm.
performance. But if it's happening in their coffee shop, like just down the street, so the idea was in that sense to promote poetry. Yeah, it was quite successful. And so that was kind of the idea of it. As I got better at it, as we developed it more, um, I made sure to really get the diversity aspect of it as well. And so originally it was a lot of Hamlin people because that's the people I knew. When we started doing festivals, which was like 25 readings in the span of a month, I really strive to like, we need to bring in like all of the Twin Cities writers communities into this. And
Hmm.
it was just, and then we started doing themes. And what's fascinating was when you see how different cultures, people from different practices, creative focuses, how they all came together onto one idea, which was the theme of the reading.
Yeah, and I think we had talked about this before, and you said it was neat to see the issue from different angles, and I think the way that it's presented, like it's the one that I attended was so deeply personal, and so just that empathy building just through hearing this person's experience, and it's paired with music, so it's a very like multi-sensory experience.
Yeah.
Just really neat.
One of the most successful ones that I organized in the was back in the Twin Cities. It was a reading called One Death, and it was in a funeral chapel. And one of the questions like we were trying to tackle with is how do you build empathy across races? Something, we're looking at the Read Walk program, and how do you build that? And I read an article not too long before setting up that reading that talked about how people just aren't practiced in having that same empathy and feeling for someone of another race.
Hmm.
It's habit building, and it was kind of talking about all races, but it was more focused on American tensions, so between white and black. And so one of my quests was, well, how do we do that? How do we have that empathy kind of transfer over and understood? So for that one funeral chapel reading, what I did was so the reading was called One Death. So every writer was instructed just to write a piece on like one death. That was the simple theme.
Like a loss that they had experienced.
I like one of the ways I approached this was like I trust my writers. So I just say it's in a funeral chapel, so that already kind of had that. And I'll say that the funeral chapel readings were very popular. Like all
Hmm.
writers wanted to write in the funeral chapel.
Okay.
To like this is a universal theme that we can absolutely address. And so I didn't give my writers any other instructions except for the title. I just kind of have learned to trust them with that.
Hmm.
And so I had so I didn't even know what was coming, which was kind of what's really a thrill for me. So we had someone singing a lament at the beginning and at the end. Then I had three white writers and then three writers of color, and I intentionally like interspersed them. So it'll be one white, one writer of color, one white, one writer of color. Everyone brought such awesome work. Like everyone brought incredible work, but couldn't kind of leave that reading without seeing what was happening here. The white writers did think one of them was a ghost story. Another was an elderly, very successful artist getting her last interview. And those were both fiction. And then someone else had done work focused on him losing a friend to liver rapids. Um, so interspersed between those were the writers of color, of which two were black and then one was Latino. And the writing was very different. So then there was work on police brutality happening.
Mm.
And then one lady did hers on how slavery was affecting her now, today's age. And really and that was an essay. And so she really kind of got into that. And so as I said, everyone did incredible work, but you couldn't escape the fact that either, some of this was natural deaths or accidental death, and you felt those deep emotions for them. And then in between those, you had, purposeful deaths or purposeful just crimes. Um, and so that was just a very successful reading to do that mission.
Hmm. Very cool. Yeah. That's neat that taking a time in your life that you were struggling, like you came up with this creative idea, and then those topics that you said that the people, the authors of color talked about, those are like so hot right now, like that's
Yeah.
what's happening. And so I think that would be cool if are those like accessible online? Like can people watch them?
Part of at the time especially, I was kind of and this was like years ago now. So, I've been in Cedar Rapids for like 4 years, and this was, I think, at least 3, 4 years before that. So no, I didn't do recordings of it, partly because,
Okay.
it was kind of the same with the one reading here, where this is heavy emotional stuff.
Yeah, everybody, all the authors would have to agree to that or be
Yeah,
comfortable with that.
exactly.
And then you
So
might not get like the same, maybe you wouldn't get the same emotional impact if
yeah,
you
maybe you
like
won't.
just read
But at the
about
same
it. Yeah.
time, that's kind of more important now in some sense. Like everyone's doing this for an audience. Everyone wants their stories out. So it is crossed my mind. It's well, going forward, especially going forward in the current year, that's probably the only way to go about it now is to record it.
Yeah.
And so yeah, so sadly they're not available online, but I have had thoughts of me creating it, and we'll see kind of what happens. I'd have to get in touch with those writers, but as I said, there were a lot of writers who wanted that funeral chapel reading, and I
Yeah.
know them to be very talented people.
Yeah.
So
Or even like audio recordings of it. Like, you don't have to get everybody there, like, especially with the pandemic going on.
yeah, exactly. That's what
But
I'm saying.
maybe like
Now it's the
audio
only way.
recordings of them reading their work. But I was wondering, what are you currently working on now?
I'm
Feel in the
currently work.
pipeline.
Yeah, so I'm currently working on my main thing that I want to do is continue writing stories in the world of Adagari.
Hmm.
That's been like
So
a
the
lifelong
Zipacana
obsession.
series.
So the next book that I'm writing on now actually doesn't have dragons in it.
Yeah.
Partly because I want to push myself. For me, writing is that journey. It's almost a spiritual journey, and so I want to push myself into exploring other ideas I have, other thoughts of other mythologies I have through this avenue. Um, so I'm working on something now, on a series now. The first book is tentatively called Escape from Makta. But what I love about this one is that I'm exploring a lot more of my fantasy world than this one does. And I'm seeing a lot more characters, really exploring the culture of these other races that we kind of talked about. Secret of Zipacana Dragons focuses, the setting is mainly like a military base, and then the Zipacana Mountain, which is where the dragons live. The ones I'm working on now is really getting into the cities of these
Hmm.
different races as well, how their magic has influenced their culture. So yeah,
It's
that's what
part
I'm
of the
working
same
on now.
series, or it's a separate one that you're starting?
let's say it's part of the same world.
It's in the same world. Okay.
It's in the same world.
Cool.
And so some
Yeah.
characters I do have ideas far down the road of characters from Zipacana Dragons kind of coming back in, but it's going to focus on a complete new set of characters. Again, just because I'm excited to push myself into discovering so much more what this place looks like. And I do finally have I have a map now of the entire world.
Oh,
So
wow.
that I just put out yesterday, actually. Well, depending on when this is.
Oh, is that on your
I,
website?
it is. It's on my Facebook. Yes, it will be on
Okay.
my website by the time of the year.
Okay. I
Good to
just
have a
wondered.
goal. And then,
Okay.
I mean, otherwise, I still like doing poetry, and it's poetry where that's closer to the world we live in now for me. That's how I kind of access that, and so I definitely do want to continue doing that. Yeah, continue with that as well. That's also
Cool.
when I started grad school, I was like, I'm going to go in there as a fiction writer. I'm going to come out as a great fiction writer. And then the first class we did was like, well, you're going to be writing poetry and creative nonfiction. I'm like, that's not what I signed up for. But doing those, I just feel so blessed to have really studied and be like, oh, I can call myself a poet now. And then of course, dabbling in different forms of writing absolutely informs the other as well.
It strengthens you.
Yeah.
Yeah. Very cool. Would you be willing to share a poem with us? And that's kind of how we can wrap things up.
Yeah, I would love to. Let me
Cool.
pull up one. This one is called The Pure Sense of Things. The pure sense of things. Sometimes I like the pure sense of things. The taste of a single basil leaf. A single note pressed on a piano. I lay on the grass and see only the color blue. Sometimes an Indian curry can be too messy. 17 flavors competing for an outlet of recognition. The cello strings of an orchestra reaching ears that don't know they even exist. To be overwhelmed by the chaos. To want to push it away and say, no, this is too much. Not how things should be. In India, I feel sometimes that nothing is pure. 14 dishes with 16 ingredients on a plate. 200 gods with 300 different faces that are half man, half woman, half elephant, half baby, half lion, half man, half monkey, half wind, with 4 to 8 arms waving, 12 different symbols, color everywhere. And I shrank from Hinduism, overwhelmed. Try taking a child, adult or otherwise, who knows only of black and white, or even of just white. Toss them into a year of holy festivals, of purple, green, and magenta, of evolution, African drumming, 20 types of orange juice, 5 different genders, 365 ways to have sex, 139 ways to say hello. Overwhelmed. Why can't we all just say hello? Why does the world have to be so big? But 100,000 curries later, and I relish the taste of saffron in the back of my mouth, the warmth of turmeric in my throat, chilies on my lips, that cello in the orchestra. How an elephant-headed baby god can hold an axe in one hand and a bowl of sweetmeats in the other. So tempt the fearfully ignorant with a bowl of laddus. Seduce them into taking those first steps towards experience. It makes the world small again, manageable and sweet.
Oh, how neat.
Thank you.
Yeah, that was really cool.
Yeah, and thanks for the opportunity. I enjoy reading them too. So
tingles. Well, thank you so much, Satish, for joining me today and being willing to go share your creative journey with us and your passion, and I really appreciate it.
Yeah, I love being here. Thank you so much for reaching out.
Cool, and I'm excited to read your next book.
Okay, I will get to writing it.
When is that going to come out?
I'd like to say it made to push me. Let me put it that way. A third of it is done, and I'm rewriting like the second and third. So I don't know yet. I
Don't
want it
worry,
to get the
that's okay.
attention that it deserves. It's much more complicated than the other one, which is what I kind of love about it.
Cool.
So,
Well,
yeah.
thanks again.
Yeah, thanks again, Tara.
Bye.
Bye.